thanks a lot for coming in.
Good morning. Happy to be here.
Something about this community appeals to you?
This is a wonderful place to live.
For Kelowna Now, this is Kent Molgat. And we're joined by Dan Albas, the MP for Central Okanagan Similkameen. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks so much for having me.
And I wanted you to come in because you have this new mouthful of a shadow cabinet portfolio, which is innovation, science and economic development, and
internal trade.
Internal trade.
Yes.
And I guess internal trade, I right away think about the work you've done trying to free my grapes, so to speak, so that BC wineries can sell directly to customers across the country, which you've been trying to do. It seems like that one just keeps getting stuck with other provinces. Before we get right into that, though, spell out this shadow cabinet portfolio of yours. What are you doing now?
Okay, well, originally, just up until recently, I was the shadow minister for small business, and so that was, part of the overall innovation, science, economic development, and internal trade file, but as a junior position. So now I've just really moved into the position over that. I love small business. I love working on their issues, but you know what? We live in an age of constant change. So if you look at it, the internet has been changing the way we work. We have artificial intelligence coming down the pipeline in so many different ways, and that has impacts on our labor force, that has impacts on new technology, that has impacts on new solutions to old problems. And so my position, is to cover a wide span of different things. Particularly, we want to make sure that Canadians are best positioned. One thing that I hope to bring to the role is I know Navdeep Bains, the minister, fairly well. We have a good working relationship. Obviously, I was pushing him pretty hard during the Free the Beer campaign, and I found him to be, just an excellent listener. And so I hope with this, I can not only will be able to hold the government to account for its policies and for its spending, but also to be able to propose things that I think Canadians will broadly support.
Right. Okay. So when I think of internal trade, there is that wine file, and even though I have a family connection to that business, I've almost become bored by it because it seems like you've done what you can. The federal government has said this should happen, but we've got provinces dragging their feet, and so, the day when it's fully legal seems like it'll never come.
Well, again, there's a lot of moving parts to it. So we had the Como case that the Supreme Court heard, and while the decision was disappointing, it also does point out that provinces cannot just willy-nilly put up trade barriers. And so there's going to be other opportunities through the court system. The provinces, through the Council of the Federation, recently had a discussion on this. Brian Pallister from Manitoba, which, by the way, immediately adopted the Free My Grapes movement and just said, for personal consumption, beer, wine, and spirits, fill your boots. We're not going to interfere in this area. Right. He proposed that this is an area that they could work and agree on. They proposed doubling the personal exemption, how much you could bring on your person, not unfortunately to transit, through a shipping company. But even with that, there was not agreement to move forward. And so, I do think that there is becoming a pan-Canadian consensus. I do know some of the members of the Ford government in Ontario, and while they have a lot on their plate to make their promises, I do believe this is an area that it can contrast with the previous Liberal government, because when I would bring this up to Kathleen Wynne, when Christy Clark would raise it to Kathleen Wynne, oftentimes it would be ignored, or they would say, well, not now. Well, I think Canadians are getting a little fed up. And even when Andrew Scheer was speaking on the island recently at a town hall, he's asked me to look at some of the legislative options. We've gone back and forth with a couple potential solutions. And, he wants to see that in areas of federal jurisdiction, particularly on the areas of wine, beer, and spirits, that Canadians should be able to trade their products with Canadians.
So, and you were hinting prior to this interview that the federal government would have the power, if you so chose, to force their hand and say, the time of consultation is over.
Yeah, and this is where leadership is there, and I think the people are there. But I also would just say that, what was not helpful in the Como case, the Supreme Court process, is having a federal government where the Minister of Justice and the Minister of Innovation, Science, and Economic Development were basically suggesting that this free trade thing should be just done by the provinces. Well, you know what? That approach, while it's merited some with my bill and with the previous government's legislation, we have 3 provinces, BC, Nova Scotia, and Manitoba. We need to do a lot more. And part of it is asserting, what is federal jurisdiction, and interprovincial shipping is clearly laid out in the Constitution.
So the businesses that you try to support through this, trade within the country.
Yes.
It's hard not to notice that we've got going on, with NAFTA right now. A lot of these businesses also, try to have customers across the border. So what do you make of all this? And whatever you think about the current federal government, they are in a real tough bind. It seems they have a number of really bad choices they could make going forward, and they have to almost pick the best of the worst.
Yeah, but again, Mexico, which had, I would say, much more difficult issues with the current administration. Labor standards, environmental standards, capital flows, etc. They were able to come to a deal. And one of the pitfalls of that, or one of the consequences of that, is that now Canada is basically put where we're following the precedent set by Mexico and the United States. And the really unfortunate part about that is because they were talking about trilateral issues, like in cars and whatnot, and we weren't at that table, what that leaves us where now we have to follow the precedent. And that puts a lot more pressure on our negotiating team. So I totally agree, it's a challenge. But if Mexico can come to an agreement with the Americans where they feel that these issues can be solved, then the question would be, why weren't we at the table? And deals are possible. But again, like the Prime Minister and Chrystia Freeland have said, it has to be a win-win-win. We need to have some settlement, because I will tell you, there's lots of investment right now that should be happening in this country. So
just dragging our feet until Trump's out of the picture isn't a good option?
Well, again, we already know what the tariffs Mr. Trump has put on us under so-called national security front, and we actually, as Canadians, are paying higher tariffs right now because of those things. And again, if he threatens to add more, like he has on auto, that's 160,000 jobs attached just to that one sector, not necessarily the economic spinoff. So this is a very serious time. I want a good deal for Canada. I don't necessarily think that our position was increased when Mexico came to a successful conclusion with the United States, but it does show that a deal can be made, and so I would really encourage the government to continue to do what they can, because every day we don't have that certainty. Every day, when there's a story down in Washington and New York about a new investment coming into the United States, that investment flows to the areas where there's stability and where there's opportunity. And right now, we don't have that stability and opportunity here in Canada, and that means less Canadian jobs down the road.
So I want to move to another topic,
Yes.
the nomination process.
Yes.
One thing I find kind of strange is that there isn't a date set as to when, the actual nomination meeting will take place. I guess we'll be hearing that in the next
Well, the
while.
party, at least from my understanding, has taken that they really want competitive processes. So once 2 to 3 good candidates come along and are ready to go head-to-head, then they'll say, okay, that area is ready for a good race. Because, when you have, if you only have 1 or 2 people, it's hard to get excited. But when you get 2 or 3 very qualified candidates.
Is that the best case scenario? Because I think back to, I started covering these things, I hate to admit it, back in the late 80s, and you had hundreds of people showing up in curling rinks and things with each group with their signs, the bottom of the table, the leader of that, or that candidate would say, well, I'm going to suggest we support this, and then another round of votes. It was quite a dynamic process. It's been a while since we've seen that kind of energy.
Well, if you look at last time when the Kelowna Lake Country nomination was with Ron Cannon, when Ron Cannon won it, you had excellent people like Ben Stewart, like Norm Letnick, and I believe Al Rees. There's a whole host of different people.
It was getting there, wasn't it? There was quite a bit of energy there.
Because this is a tremendously, it's a tremendous riding. Kelowna, is a wonderful place to live and represent, and so I can imagine that there's going to be some high-quality candidates, and really, Andrew Scheer has been attracting right across the country a variety of different candidates.
Right. But before we wrap this up, because we always go on too long, we're just on the edge now.
Because we're having fun, right?
There's nothing I enjoy more than this.
Good.
No, really, I love it. But we're heading into this weird phase of our history where pot is going to be legal. Mm-hmm. What do you think about that? Or do you have worries? Or do you think that it's going to be all right?
Well, we've talked about this before, and I think right now we've gotten past, with the legislation now being passed, past the debate of whether or not legalization, yes or no. What we are into now is, how does this roll out? and where the concerns
Do you
are.
think it's good? Does it look to you like it's going
Well,
to roll out in an orderly fashion?
Well, I've spoken to different lawyers. So I talked to a criminal lawyer, and he has massive concerns with the way the testing will be done. There's not necessarily the equipment or a court process like we do have, with alcohol. There's a very simple test that
So
can
we
be
might be
administered.
heading into it a little unready.
Well, yeah. So from the court side, absolutely. But I spoke to an employment lawyer yesterday who said that she's very concerned that there is not the appropriate procedures and policies for employers to be able to know how to handle legalized marijuana in their workplaces. Now, some already have those protocols. Like, for example, major mining operations, when you're dealing with major pieces of equipment.
I interviewed a lawyer about that very topic right here on this couch. You should check it out.
Oh, good.
A lot of good
Well,
information.
and
it's simple, but it's complicated.
Yes. Well, and you know what? And that's where I think that the provinces, if you look at it, dealing with municipalities and zoning, where they're going to be sales, are they going to be private sales? Are they going to be over the internet? There's so many sub issues here, but I do agree that on the employment side, if there's a health and safety risk, then I'm concerned about that, because people expect when they get on the road or they're at their workplaces that there are going to be protections for them. And from speaking to these experts, I don't necessarily think that those things are there just yet.
All right. So much going on.
Yeah. Thanks again for having me.
And we'll have you again in real soon, okay?
I love the format, Kent. Thank you so much.
Dan Albas, thank you. And thank you for watching Kelowna Now.